and then that'll sort of get a general kind of discussion in reference to that. And then that last segment, which is 10 minutes, and we'll talk about general kinds of things that fall within the framework of some of the challenges of African American youth. Let me swallow this little piece of cough drop that I have here. Welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is some of the challenges of African American youth, and we're fortunate to have with us to talk about some of the challenges of African American youth, Pastor Kay Walker, Miss Stephanie Johnson, and Mr. Harold Shaw. Of course, let me welcome all three of you to the show this morning, Pastor. Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is the challenges of African American youth, and we're fortunate to have with us to talk about some of the challenges of African American youth, Pastor Kay Walker, Ms. Stephanie Johnson, and Mr. Harold Shaw. And of course, Pastor Walker, Ms. Johnson, and Mr. Shaw, let me welcome the three of you to the show this morning to talk about what I consider to be a very, very important topic, and a topic that the three of you have a lot of information in reference to it. And of course, Pastor Walker, you've been with us on many occasions, as well as Ms. Johnson, you might be new to this particular show, but the three of you should know that this first segment will be made up of what we call your background, education, and experiences. The idea is to give the audience some idea as to who you are, talking about the topic dealing with some of the challenges of African American youth. Then we'll have a break, and we'll come back for an 8-minute segment, and we'll give you an opportunity to further expand upon some of the challenges of African American youth, and then we'll have a break, and our final segment will be 10 minutes, and it gives us an opportunity to sort of bring together all of the information that we've tried to deal with this particular morning. And so let us start off, Pastor Walker, by having you to give us some information, some statements in reference to your background, your education, and some of your experiences. Ms. Johnson will do the same, as well as Mr. Shaw.
Well, thanks again, Dr. Haney, for having me on the show. I've been here many times, born and raised right here in Nashville, Tennessee. Good parents, I call them good parents. They raised me right. I went wrong, but they raised me right. ended up becoming got kicked out of the public school system here, actually in the state of Tennessee. Back then, they had a safety net for me. I was able to go into the military. Now you have to have a GED or graduate to be able to get in now. But back then, you could go in without it. So I went into the military after having also gotten into some trouble. After getting kicked out of the public school system, got out of the military, got a GED through OIC, Opportunities Industrialization Center. From there, did some studies at Tennessee State University. Didn't complete it. My drug addiction got the best of me, drove me out of the college scene, ended up incarcerated in the state prison system. And just lived a lifestyle of crime for many years, 17 plus years drug addiction, crime, and all of that stuff back in 1986. To be exact, August 24th, God intervened in my life, called me away from that lifestyle of drug addiction and crime and everything, and called me into the ministry. And this is what I've been doing ever since. That's what brings me to this show, because I'm always looking to make a difference in the lives of other people.
Very good. And of course, Mr. Johnson, what about you?
Hey, I was born and raised here as well. I grew up in my grandmother's home. She was a foster mom to 100 plus kids here in Nashville over the decades. And so I saw a lot of youth coming in and out. A lot were African American youth. And then I went to Hunter's Lane. It's one of the, I would say, more rougher schools here in Nashville. And there was a lot of fights and violence in there. I went on to go to Regent University, where I got a degree in organizational leadership and management. And there I learned about human trafficking and started doing a lot of work in that, and saw a lot of African American women being put into that trade and whatnot. And so, yeah.
Very good. What about you, Mr. Shaw?
Well, I'm born and raised right here in Nashville too, over in North Nashville. Graduated from Pearl Cone, went into the military, did 20 years in the military. While in the military, I had a chance to do some mentoring and do some work with kids in high school. That what led me to, when I retired, to start my own organization. It's me and some of my dedicated best friends and staff members that I have with it. It's called We Are Relevant, and our main goal is to get these kids ready for college. I read through a website, it's called usnews.com, and it actually gives a grade point for all the different high schools. And then when I seen that Pearl Cone was graduating 87%, only 6% of them was ready for college. So I knew at that time that even though it's 87% sound good, these kids are not ready for college. So we're gonna start at the 5th grade level, and we mentor those kids all the way through high school, and it also has to make sure that they do community service.
And so in a real sense, all three of you represent some efforts to deal with some of the challenges of African American youth. And what we'll do, we'll have our first commercial break, and then we'll come back and we'll allow the three of you to talk about something specifically in reference to some of the problems or some of the challenges or some of the successes of African American youth during this second period following this very, very short commercial break. And of course, what we'll try to do is to join you when we come back with our second segment of the show for the morning. Thank you, and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Pastor Kay Walker, Ms. Stephanie Johnson, and Mr. Shaw, and they're giving us some information in reference to some of the challenges of the African American youth. And of course, let's start off with you, Mr. Shaw, by having you to think in terms of some of your activities and how this would fit into some of the challenges dealing with the African American youth, as well as we said earlier, some of the successes. And then Ms. Johnson will give us some basic information in reference to her challenges, and of course Ms. Johnson is going to talk and speak as loud as she possibly can so that we can hear her talk about some of the great things that she's doing in reference to the challenges, and of course Pastor Walker will close us out for this particular segment. Let's start off with you, Mr. Shaw.
Well, some of the most important challenges that our kids have today is education. A lot of these people in a society, just because we come in an urban neighborhoods thinking that the kids are bad. So right off the bat, they're branded as being bad. They're not bad. To me, I think they're just uninterested. And it's kind of hard for the kids to be interested in something when the classes are overcrowded. So my organization, being We Are Relevant, WAR is our nickname, because we are at war because these kids are killing kids. So our main goal is to make sure that we can help these teachers out in the classroom. We want these kids to graduate with a 3.5 GPA or better. That way when they do go to college, when they do go on to further their education, they have the backgrounds and the means to be successful, be, good in the community, and hopefully they can go out and mentor, do the same things that we're doing. We all have had some bad times in our past, but we've overcome those. As I'm getting older, I'm grateful that I've overcome those. So I want to make sure I pass that knowledge on.
What about you, Stephanie? Let's talk about some of your experiences working with young people, and whether they have been positive experiences or whether they've been negative experiences. Talk about that this morning.
A lot of my experiences have been positive. I am one of those youth as well. I look at a lot of statistics and things like that, and looking at the jail statistics, a lot of those youth who are going into jails, they come from single parent homes, single mother homes. And so we really have to start focusing on that area. And then talking with the police department, they really believe that we need more volunteers in school. And so we see these two areas shouting to us about this is a problem. So if we can see the problem, like this young man, we can start to go in and really focus on it and solve it.
Very good. And I think you mentioned earlier in reference to some of the problems that you've dealt with, dealing with incarceration and information that you have in reference to that. So make some statements in reference to that.
So our
Johnson.
DA's office is not the most, they're very lenient on things, and that's coming from state down. Like they don't want to be looked at as too hard or anything on crime, but a lot of the crime that's happening is repeat offenses. And I understand not wanting to put people in jail because we don't really have a reform system. But there are organizations who believe in reform, like Men of Valor, and I believe we need to support those organizations that are helping to reform people in prisons and be a little tougher in those areas, because if we know that the people that are committing the crimes are repeating it, then we have to do something about it.
You know, Pastor Walker, I think we've talked about this so many times that we assume that everybody understands exactly some of the challenges that our youth face. But at the same time, each time we turn on the television show or read the newspaper and et cetera, we find many, many lives that have gone wrong. Make some statements in reference to that.
Well, Dr. Haney, especially when you talk about the prison system and stuff like that, having spent time in the prison system personally, they say the purpose of incarceration is for punishment and rehabilitation. You get plenty of punishment, in terms of how long you stay incarcerated and being away from society and stuff like that. But when it comes to rehabilitation, that's a whole different thing. There's not a whole lot of interest in rehabilitating individuals incarcerated in the system. And especially when you look at the juvenile system, man, it's somewhat of a joke. And these children are going out here committing crimes, and they're sending them into the juvenile system. But at the same time, I don't think there's enough taking place in there as well to cause any sense of real type of rehabilitation. It's kind of like a joke, and then they get back out. It's like, oh man, that wasn't nothing, until they end up in the big boy penitentiary. But education, as Brother Shaw was alluding to, education is important because people say what you don't know can't hurt you, but what you